Okay, now I'm good. All right, so announcements. Yes, we've had a busy month. October, the city of Tallahassee approved our proposal to build and install a chimney swift tower at Lake Alberta Park. And last Friday, October 15th, Jody Walthall and Jim Carr, my husband, cut out the pieces and with some assistance from me and Donna Laguerre, assembled the 3 sections that will make up the tower. This is where I need to share screen. Okay. I have a few pictures I thought I'd share. Okay, can everybody see that? Hopefully. Okay, thank you, Heather. So it's Jody Walthall working on this and Jim pitching in. Power tools were involved. This is shiplap paneling that they use that the grooves are on the inside, so the birds have something to perch on once they go inside, and then it makes this nice little 16 by 16 inch square column, and we made 3 sections that will be 12 feet tall once they're assembled. And there's the 3 sections, and this is just the carport was in the way, but you could see where they just stack on top of each other, and they have yet to they're going to have insulation added as well as the hardy boards protective siding, you know, to weatherproof and squirrel proof and whatever, critter proof it. So that is well underway, and I think Donna can give us some updates on where we're at. She'll be talking shortly. And then on Saturday, this past Saturday, October 16th, 9 Audubon volunteers joined over a dozen volunteers from Seminole Dining Airmark for their annual Airmark Building Community Day. We spent 2 hours doing a trash cleanup over at Lake Alberta. You can see there's lots of trash. And here's some of our Airmark volunteers out there. We filled probably, there's a mixed group. We filled about, I think, 20 bags. I didn't think to go around and get a count, but we did pretty good for 2 hours. And, you know, regrettably, there was a lot of trash to be picked up. A lot of it that does wash in from the lake itself. The water level was fairly low, so we were able to get down there into the weeds and pull out a lot of stuff. So we were thanked by a number of people walking around the park, just enjoying, you know, the morning, and we thought it was great that we were cleaning up all the trash. So that was gratifying. There's bags of trash in the lake, and there's some of our group here. Oops, and not pictured up. We had Heather Levy, Peter Kleinhens, Nelson Ball, Jim Carr, Donna Laguerre, me, and also Harvey Goldman and Howard Kessler and his wife, Ann. So we had a fair group out. And I'm also pleased to announce that in conjunction with this cleanup event, we applied for and received a $3,000 grant from Airmark to put towards the revitalization of Lake Alberta Park. We're applying for the bulk of these funds, or we haven't gotten a figure, I think, yet on the cost, but we're going to put it towards an interpretive sign for the bat house that you see in the picture here. And whatever might be left over, we'll put towards other projects that or cleanups, invest it in materials for park cleanups. With that, I shall stop sharing. All right, so I think with that, Donna, you have some comments about upcoming program field trip for November.
Yeah, and I wanted to just say a couple more words about the Chimney Swift Tower project. Jody and I have lived in our house in Benton Hills in Tallahassee for over 30 years. And every spring we host a pair of chimney swifts who nest in our chimney. And we're so used to their chittering sounds that when we have friends over visiting, they'll be shocked when they hear the sound coming out of our fireplace. And it's always fun to see their reactions. But the chimney swift population is in a decline. Naturally, they would be nesting in hollow trees, and they barely exist anymore. They've long since switched over to nesting in chimneys and other human-made structures. But now most people put caps on their chimneys. So it really is a kind of a problem. And that's why we decided to go ahead and build a chimney swift tower in the park. And it's only going to house one pair of chimney swifts. So it's not like it's going to make a big effect on the population. But along with the chimney swift tower, we're going to have a professionally made interpretive sign that will educate the people that visit the park as to what chimney swifts need. And maybe we can convince some people to take those caps off their chimneys because it's really enjoyable. We love having them in our house. So I'd like you to watch the website and the next email for information on how you can help us with this project. Primarily, we need to raise funds for the construction. The materials are kind of expensive, and the interpretive sign is about double the cost of the materials. Of course, our labor is donated by Jody and the other volunteers. So anyway, you'll be hearing from me again, but if people could just contribute $5, $10, it would add up, $100 if you feel like it, but we really do need to raise the funds for this park. And I also wanted to mention that Kathleen showed some very nice slides there. The thing that I'm most proud of, our work at Lake Alberta Park, aside from the environmental education programs that we've done there with the local kids, is that if you noticed around the borders of that lake, there's a nice habitat all the way around the edges. When we first started volunteering there, city was mowing right down to the edges of the water. So our group has worked very closely with the city staff to get them to leave a good buffer there. And it is full of wildflowers and full of insects. Okay, so now I am asked to tell you about the next, I'm not sure if it's the next one, but an upcoming field trip called Explore Lost Creek Forest with Janelle Cleveland. It's on Saturday, November 13th from 9 to 11. And that's located on Airport Road in Thomasville, Georgia. It's a great opportunity to visit a pristine slope forest and wetlands track before our November program meeting. And that program meeting is going to be about how this property, originally slated for development, was saved through citizen effort. Janelle Cleveland of the Friends of Lost Creek Forest will lead our field trip. Beth Grant, who led the effort to preserve this forest, will also participate. So you can bring your binoculars, although we're not billing it as a birding field trip. It's going to be an exploration. Also, my husband, Jody Walthall, besides being a really good woodworker, he's excellent at tree identification. So if you want to learn the trees that day, he'll be on the walk as well. The walking loop is 1.5 miles, so it's pretty doable. It does have some uneven terrain, but it's relatively easy. Bring water and snacks, and you need to call or text me. You can go to the website to look up my phone number. It's on the website. The group size is limited to 15. And also, Janelle is inviting participants to bird on her nearby farm afterwards, as she has a gorgeous male vermilion flycatcher who has just returned for his 4th winter. So sign up if you're interested. But as I said, it's going to be limited to 15. If you want to hear a little bit more about what Lost Creek Forest is, check out our website. There's some extra information there. But I haven't been there. I know Peter's been there, and he talks about how beautiful the hardwood forest is. And then our November program, which will be the 3rd Thursday, November 18th from 7 to 8, is Lost Creek Forest, a conservation story in progress with Beth Grant. And so that will be actually after the field trip, but Beth does a really wonderful job at not only describing the forest, but explaining the whole process that she and others went through and actually preventing it from being developed. I think it was slated for industrial development. And I think that's all the announcements I have. And I think it's on to Heather. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to give a quick update. We, Peter and I co-led a trip down the Slave Canal 2 Sundays ago, and it was adventurous and a ton of fun. There's some people on here who can hopefully attest to that. And that was the first paddling trip that's been done in a long time, if ever, and we're hoping to have more paddling trips, so stay tuned. The next upcoming field trip we're going to have is on November 6th, and this is going to be more of a relaxed birding social, so there won't be a leader there. It's kind of more of, if you want to bring your kids, your family members, it's kind of more of a leisurely stroll. There are 4 potential locations that we have listed on our website, and if you email us to vote on them, it's between St. Mark's, Eleanor Clap Phipps, Munson Sandhills, and St. Mark's River Preserve State Park. So far, St. Mark's River State Park is in the lead, which is cool because that's a super underbirded spot. And it's also a really easily accessible spot for a lot of people. So if you are interested, check out our field trip page, and we are looking forward to seeing you on November 6th.
So, okay, I guess I will introduce Doug. Sorry, I wasn't ready to do that. Hang on, I need to open the right thing. Actually, Donna, oops. All right. They moved my cheese again. Oh, wait, that's right. And I'm just gonna, Doug Alderson, I mean, I think I am just not seeing my information for this.
Okay.
But
I know about half the people here. So
okay, so I'm gonna say, yeah. Doug is gonna talk about river ecosystems and in Florida, and I'll just let you take it, Doug.
Thank you. Yes, I want to give you a tour of some of the Florida rivers that we have. Most of you have been on the rivers around this area, but there's some in the state maybe you want to explore after you've seen some of the photos I'm going to show. And I want to emphasize some of the wildlife you might see and the birds you might see in some of these rivers as well. So thanks for inviting me, and I'm going to share my screen and open up PowerPoint. So I've been exploring Florida rivers most of my life since I was transplanted here from Chicago area when I was 11. So ever since then, the family bought a canoe, and then last 20 or so years, I've been in a kayak most of the time, exploring the rivers. And most of the photos you'll see I took in the last 15 years or so, mostly in the last 3 or 4. But you'll see some familiar places and hopefully some new ones you want to explore. And this shot here is of Graham Creek, which is off Highway 65 below Sumatra. So some of you may be familiar with that area in Liberty County, and Upper Franklin County is a beautiful place with lots of side streams. But this journey is going to go from the Alabama border and the Perdito River here to South Florida. I divide my latest book on Florida rivers into 3 parts. One is the mighty rivers, the big rivers in the state, the spring-fed rivers, and also the blackwater rivers, which I call swamp streams, because most of them are fed by big swamps. So the Perdito is a beautiful blackwater river, but it's really mostly this golden color because of the white sand banks. And it's fairly wild along the Alabama-Florida border. And rivers have been borders for Native American tribes. They've been borders for states, existing borders, territories for many hundreds of years and beyond. They still are in many cases. This is the Perdito Bay. So I was on a trip with Paddle Florida for 5 days on the Perdito And this is pretty much where we ended up in this beautiful bay with a beautiful sunset right before the big weather hit the next day, which we couldn't paddle the next day. But some of these panhandle rivers have some beautiful mountain laurel, some vegetation that you normally see in the northern states. They are kind of, each one's unique, but similar color of water, that golden color against the white sand, beautiful white sandbanks. And this is the Holmes Creek, which is near the town of Vernon. And the beauty of this one too is some of the side springs, which is Cypress Spring. Some of these springs are really what you want to see in springs. They're really when I was a boy, seeing some of the springs along the Swanny and Wakaiba Springs, this is what we saw. And many of these panhandle springs are still this blue, pristine gin color, basically, that you want to see in springs. And this is the case with Cypress Spring most of the time. Econfine Creek is the major water source for Panama City, and also a place with many springs, and got really clobbered by Hurricane Michael, and it's slowly recovering. Most of the river is now open except for the upper part, which was the challenging part, with a kind of a narrow canyon-like nature. That is still closed. The Loxahatchee is one of our mighty rivers. It's not explored so much, but I was on a trip with Paddle Florida for 5 days from Alabama down to Highway 20. And it is very wild for a river its size. It is very undeveloped and has some beautiful side springs like Morrison Springs that we were allowed to camp there. And the Chipola, it's the only Florida river that I know of that has a dry cave most of the time, and that is the Ovens. It's a fairly shallow cave, but it kind of looks like a big oven. I guess that's where it gets its name. And I love the big rocks, moss-colored rocks that kind of remind me of Stonehenge or something around the entrance. And of course, I'm familiar. I work for the Apalachee River Keeper, so I'm very familiar with the Apalachee. I've been exploring this river most of my life, and I'm still exploring some of the side streams. But this shot on the left is of the steamship, the last steamship on the river. The name escapes me at the moment, but you can see that at low water across from Chattahoochee, you can see some of the engine and some of the parts of the ship. It was scuttled in the early 1940s. And the one of the Native Americans was a drawing done by a French visitor in the 1830s. This river has been used, of course, like most rivers, thousands of years by Native Americans. And this river has a rich steamboat history. What's interesting now is this river is much less traveled now than it was 100 years ago. You'll go on the river most any day and see maybe 2 or 3 fishing boats, and that's just about it. No more barges, no steamboats. It's a very quiet river for the most part. And we do our annual river trek every year, every October, although this year was delayed to November. And this is my favorite campsite, I think, in Florida. This is a sandbar across from Alum Bluff. And so you watch the sunset hitting the bluff with beautiful colors. And it's just incredible. You don't believe you're in Florida, basically. So this was in 2019. The next morning, I'll show you a picture in a minute of some avocets, but this is just below that near Bluntstown, called Sutton's Lake. So take a look at the Cypress Knees. They're about 15 feet tall, the size of the kayak there, and see the knees. And that basically, the Cypress Knees tend to go to the height of the flood waters. And this river floods hopefully every year. And it gets pretty high, and you can see where the level is. And it's just amazing to see these type of Cypress Knees in these beautiful Tupelo cypress swamps. This is a sandbar and river trek. We stop at above Weehawken, about a mile above the town. So we camp on the sandbars 3 nights. We camp in a Forest Service campground on the 4th night. So we do the entire river from Chattahoochee to Apalachee. It's about 107 miles. And I've seen bear tracks on more than one occasion. On this occasion, the bear went into the water and we couldn't find the tracks coming out. So it either swam across the river or swam downstream. On another occasion, I saw a bear early in the morning Didn't get a picture, but that was pretty memorable. It just came down to drink. So you just never know what you're going to see. These are the Avocets I saw at Allen Bluff 2 years ago. And many of the Calhoun County birders I've talked to have never seen Avocets in Calhoun County. Maybe some of you have, but that was a thrill to see. And of course, this time of year, the bald eagles are back. And so you'll see many bald eagles along the Apalachicola. And this one was drying its wings after fishing. And we have a lot of fun. It's kind of like summer camp for adults, and lots of swimming when it's warm enough, lots of sandbars for camping and rest breaks. And some people do the trip. They've done the trip several times, and sometimes we have new people come in that have never been on the river before. And these are some of the scenes along the sloughs, which I've been exploring more extensively in the last year and a half. And this one with the canopy I took about 2 weeks ago on Devon Creek, which is off Owl Creek near Sumatra. Many of these places are near Sumatra in those Highway 65 areas, and just an incredible place to explore. A lot of twisted cypress, many of them have shapes. Sometimes they look like this one will look like a cypress angel, or somebody else said it looked like a Spanish dancer. Here's some cypress along Kennedy Creek, which is above Sumatra, just incredible shapes. The size is very impressive. This one looks kind of like an alien species. You won't see a large number of birds. I've seen some wading birds, but not too many. It's really not the habitat for too many wading birds. Of course, you'll see the prothonotary warblers, mostly in the spring and early summer. They're very common in these swamp areas. That's always a thrill. So we're going to slowly move east through the state. The Ochlockonee, I'm sure you're very familiar with. This is below the state park, launching at dawn with a group to go down to Bald Point. And many side sloughs on this river as well. This is Mac Slough, which is about halfway down from the dam to the bay. The Sopchoppy River is one of our Blackwater rivers, and just some gorgeous cypress knees and roots, and just never get tired of the scenes along this river, especially when the water is a little bit low and you can see the exposed roots. And in the springtime, we have the wild azaleas in bloom right along the river. And that's always a thrill to paddle up to these beautiful flowers. The Wakaiba, of course, in our own backyard. You can't paddle in the state park, but just below the fence is a great place, especially during the week. It gets a little busy on weekends, especially in the summertime, as you know. This shot is in the state park. And one evening, I coordinated a photo trip every year for the Wildlife Festival there. And we caught an egret just getting ready for the night with the beautiful sunset colors behind it. And so it's a shot I may never get again like this. And it was a thrill to see this. My mother painted a painting. I don't know if you can see it on my wall. I may show it later, but she loved this one, and she does oil painting at age 91. So it's a thrill to see her paintings. Of course, these are baby gallinules that you'll see along the river, and mostly in the summertime. And common gallinules are very fairly common on the river. Some people call them water chickens. And of course, the cormorants are pretty plentiful on the Wakaiba and some of our other rivers. I love seeing the manatees, especially on a really cold morning, like going up to the tower and seeing the manatees in the spring bowl. Sometimes one year we had about 55. It was pretty much a record. And lately it's been more like 20 to 30 in the wintertime. In the summertime, you might see 6 or 7. St. Mark's River. I like exploring all parts of this river. This shot in the springtime is above Natural Bridge, which is a great place to explore. You will encounter a couple snags at some point, so you may want to bring a buddy and help portage each other across the snags, and try to go up to Horn Springs, which is a beautiful spring. And the Wassissa is one of my favorites really because it's close by and it's always has a lot of wildlife. This was an immature yellow-crowned night heron. There's plenty of alligators. These are some female wood ducks. And so I like to go up some of the side creeks along the West and just stay very quiet and still. And pretty soon some of the wildlife kind of tolerates my presence and just kind of sit quietly for a while. And so there's two types of kayaking in my mind, the social type, which I enjoy visiting with people, especially during the pandemic. Outdoor adventures were some of the safest ways that we could visit with friends. And sometimes I go alone and just to watch the wildlife and to be very quiet. So this is one of those occasions. Sometimes I like to push through the wild rice and I can see the limpkins and the purple gallinules, which are a lot less common on the Wassissa than the common gallinule. And of course, you mentioned the Slave Canal, which is an incredible place to explore and see the boulders. And you have to acknowledge the people that built that canal in the 1850s and the sacrifices they made. This was on the Wassissa about a couple years ago in the springtime. These are brown water snakes. They're mating. You know, a lot of people think every snake that looks like this is a water moccasin. Of course, we know better. And the female is the bigger one, male's on top. And usually you'll see one or two males nearby that are attracted to the activity and the aromas, the scent. So it's great to see close-ups of these brown water snakes. It's probably the most common snake I see along the rivers. And of course, different turtles, the Swanny cooters, the peninsula cooter, and different other types. I love seeing those, especially the ones that I can kind of be quiet and they don't rush into the water. They just sit there and watch me or go about their business. This is an occasion I've only seen once. This was a coyote that was swimming the river. I was taking a bird photo and I heard this splashing noise. And so I went around the corner and there was a coyote that was testing the water, jumping in, jumping out, jumping in, jumping out. And finally it just launched and swam as fast as it could across the water because obviously it knows that there are alligators in the water. I got a series of photos and it didn't see me until it kind of shook off in the opposite bank and finally it saw me and took off. So I've never seen a coyote in the water like that. Of course, Peter will tell you about the oscilla, and some of you other folks here have explored the oscilla in different reaches. I haven't explored the very upper reaches like some of you, but I've done most of the river below Highway 27 and love the cypress trees and the knees and the reflections. Of course, the oscilla sinks where you can hike on the Florida Trail with the limestone boulders and the series of sinkholes. That's one of the most dramatic places I think we have in our region. And it has a little bit of rapids. And so this is my daughter about a year and a half ago, went with a group. I think Peter was on that trip and the rapids were just at their peak, the big rapids. And so we had a good time and you can run the rapids and then carry your boat around and run them again. So we had a good time doing that. And the Swanny has the largest rapids in Florida, Big Shoals, class 3 at its peak. This is a good view of Big Shoals at low water. It's too low to run with a boat, but you can see the different drop-offs. You can see why when it's looking like this, it can be a very fast and kind of a dangerous rapid. I've tipped over twice, so I'm 0 for 2 in this rapid. So I'm not a great whitewater kayaker. First time was in a canoe, second time in a whitewater kayak. So I'm not too skilled at running these rapids. I've mostly done rapids in a rubber raft in the mountains. So the Swanny Rapids here, there's something to respect. Don't take them lightly just because they're in Florida. I've done several different trips in the Swanny, some with summer camp groups, some with Paddle Florida, some with just some friends. And it always is different depending on water levels and seasons. And different sections are very different from each other. Some have a lot of springs, some have more of the high bluffs. This is the Santa Fe River, and it has some beautiful springs and wildlife. also once had a place where a naked guy named Naked Ed used to watch Lily Springs. He is not there anymore. But it was interesting to meet with him and just understand his philosophy. He'd either be naked or wearing a loincloth. And he'd been there over 20 years when I was there. And it's fun on these rivers to see otters. I've seen them on the Santa Fe and the Wasissa and many other rivers. And it's fun to watch them when they don't really see you. I was looking through vegetation in this shot, just watching a family play with each other. That was a real treat. And the Santa Fe, this one shot is the Santa Fe before it goes underwater. So you tell people up north that we have rivers that go underwater and come back up again, go underground, and they just look at you funny because many of these rivers up north do not do this. So we have a lot of sinking rivers that sink and come back up in different phases. So I have a big collection of vintage photos, and this is in Placa on the St. Johns River. So a lot of the first waves of tourists they came to Jacksonville, they took steamships up the St. Johns, they went up the Ocklawaha River, and they went up to Silver Springs, and that was the big run for many decades. Many famous people took that run, and that was the first exposure many people had of Florida, was doing that trip. This is scenes along the St. Johns, and many of you see kingfishers. When I see them, they're usually calling. They're going ahead of you the entire time. They land about 3 seconds and keep going. And so to get a photo of one is very difficult in my mind because they never sit very still. But this one had a fish, and so I was able to take a photo. He didn't want to let go of his fish. This scene with Big Lake, the St. Johns, has many large lakes. I was on a trip and with Paddle, Florida, and this is just before the storm hit on Lake George. Many, I like the old Florida fish camps, and this one was on Dunn's Creek on the St. Johns River. The Ocklawaha is a beautiful river, even though it still has the dam, which after 50 years, it really should come out. But it's a great place to explore. This log we found, it was probably notched by loggers about 100 years ago. And most of these rivers used to have ferries, including this one. And of course, bridges replaced the ferries. But this shot is from about 1905 of the ferry on the Ocklawaha River. And this is a scene on the lower Ocklawaha, maybe about 10 miles above the lake, the Rodman Reservoir. So I was on a trip from Silver Springs to the dam, basically. And just above the dam, the river got clogged up with a water lettuce, and you couldn't really move. And we had to get a state guy with an airboat to really clear the way so we can even get through. And there was 50 of us on the Paddle Florida trip. And so it was a lengthy operation. And that was basically backed up from the dam because of the dam. And this is the Silver River in the wintertime. It's a great place to explore and see wildlife. It's only about 5 miles long, but you'll see different night herons, and you'll see monkeys, very controversial animals. They are fun to watch because they have a lot of expressions like any primate, but people feed them and they become kind of aggressive and they compete with native wildlife, and they carry a deadly disease sometimes if they're provoked. And so you have to be careful of the monkeys. And right now their population is growing, so it's created a problem with the managers. We have two Withlacoochee rivers. This is the one near Yankeetown in that region, and Dunellen. And this is where I've seen the largest number of limpkins. At one point I saw about 35 or so in one day. If you've ever camped out on a river and had a limpkin call all night long or scream all night long, it's not something that I would recommend. This one limpkin basically kept most of us awake most of the night. I asked Dana Bryan, what's the deal with the limpkin crying all night long? And he said it was a male that was calling the female at night, hoping the female will land. And he didn't have any luck for 2 nights. We were there for 2 nights, this one spot with this crying limpkin all night. This was around February in this region. So one of my favorite rivers is the Rock Springs run of Wakaiba River, just above Orlando, near Apopka. It's a great place to see wildlife, as well as just canoeing a wild river through some mostly state lands. Spring fed. And I was waiting for some kayakers to come down, and this blue-gray gnatcatcher just kind of landed nearby, and I just kind of had this relationship with it as it just watched me, and I watched this beautiful bird. Of course, took its profile, took its photo. And farther down, the saw some spoonbills, which we're starting to see more and more around St. Mark's Refuge. In the old days, I never saw any spoonbills up here, but we're starting to see more. But it's always a thrill to see spoonbills, one of the prettiest birds in Florida. You know, there's debate now. I don't know if you guys have chimed in on who is going to be the state bird. Maybe the spoonbill would be a good candidate. And this is the Wakaiba River early morning. So I've done several 3-day trips from the top of the Rock Springs run down to the St. Johns River. And it's just a great trip. The Peace River in Southwest Florida, so named by the Spanish because it's very peaceful, very calm most of the time. And of course, it's famous for its fossils. And you can see these dugong bones just along the banks in low water. It's just pretty amazing at how many fossils are exposed. You can also see the ribs of these phosphate barges from the late 1800s, early 1900s. Used to carry phosphate down the river, and they used to mine the riverbeds for pebble phosphate. The area is still heavily mined, and it's hoped that maybe when the mining stops, maybe some of the springs like Kissimmee Spring will come back. There was a major spring near the river that dried up mainly due to phosphate mining in the region. This is an old postcard of the lower Peace River, and it's from about 1908. The Hillsborough River is an amazing river because it's so close to Tampa, and yet it's very wild. It goes through a state park and other state lands. You see a lot of wildlife. It has a little bit of a rapids. You can hike along part of it, as well as kayak or canoe the river. And I highly recommend the upper part. And it goes right through Tampa and Tampa Bay. This postcard's from about 1905 or so. The Alafaya, which is below Tampa Bay, has some small rapids. And it was once the site where circus performers used to retire, and they had a fish camp on the river. And it was called the Giant's Fish Camp. This is the early 1950s. And the giant would greet you along with a couple of small people that were about 3 feet tall. So it was just an amazing business that was run on the river. And Fish Eating Creek is where Clyde Butcher was inspired to start taking Florida photos. And you can see why with the beautiful roots and the Cypress Knees of this river. This is low water about a year and a half ago. The Kissimmee River in 2007, I was part of an expedition from Orlando to Lake Okeechobee. I think we took about 14 days. And of course, the highlight was the restored section of the Kissimmee River, which they have now finished their project. They haven't restored the entire river, but they're finished with the project. About 45 miles of the original channel has been restored. Some dams have been taken out. They have taken out the ditch and restored the wind back in the river. And parts of it are very inspiring because it's like a river going through the Everglades with the river of grass. So the floodplain is about 2 miles wide in places. And it's just this beautiful open area, marsh with some tree islands. So it starts near Orlando on Shingle Creek, goes to the chain of lakes, Kissimmee River, and on into Lake Okeechobee. And so it was a memorable trip. And we were highlighting the restoration of the system. And it's nice to see that it's basically finished. And of course, the upper chain of lakes was very popular, even in the late 1800s, with many hotels on the lakes. like in this scene, Hotel Kissimmee, near Kissimmee. Myakka, I think it's the largest concentration of alligators I've seen, really big ones too. And it's a great bird watching spot as well. I encourage you to visit the state park there, take the different tours, do some hikes, maybe a kayak or canoe trip. Just be aware there are several thousand alligators, and they move around between the upper and lower lakes. And it's just amazing the quantity and the size of these gators. You won't see this abundance up in this region. The Loxahatchee is the wildest river in southeast Florida. It's one of two federal wild and scenic rivers, and you can see why when you're on the river. It's all state lands. Some beautiful, very tropical looking, and it goes to the state park, and it goes to Trapper Nelson's place, which he was kind of a Tarzan-like figure that had a camp on the river. That had tourists would come visit him, and he charged a little fee, show him some snakes and gators and other wildlife. And now it's part of the state park, and they tour his homestead. Of course, the Miami River, many of the rivers in southeast Florida have been channelized, and they're quite different. The Miami River is one of those, very historic with the Seminoles, but it's still around. It's still a river you can explore, but it's changed quite a bit, as you can imagine, going through Miami area. So some of the challenges, I don't want to focus on this completely, but as most of you know, I'm speaking to the choir here, but we have a problem with our springs, with pollution, and with the quantity of water being pumped out of the aquifer. These are some figures that should be alarming to about anybody that sees this. This photo is on the Wakaiba River, which is one of the busiest rivers in the state for recreation, and the state is trying to do more regulation on the number of boats, not just kayaks and canoes, but motorboats that come up from the Gulf that use this river. It's kind of being loved to death. But we were taking out we found this big rusty barrel we took out with a kayak, as you can see here. So we're always doing cleanups on these rivers, and I keep the trash pickers in the car and always trying to clean up landings and places like that and just leave it better than when you found it. I'm not going to go through this. This is on my website. I have a link to this, but it's just some of the things I try to educate folks on. Some ways we need to improve our rivers, protect our rivers. Some things involve state policies, involve political will and money, and some things we can do as landowners to reduce fertilizers and things like that. Florida-friendly yard landscaping, native plants, all those things. And of course, my pet peeve is the bottled water, and just everywhere you go, there's bottled water. I'm not sure why, how this last 20 years has just kind of taken over. And we need to get back to just good old fashioned water that comes from our wells or our tap water, and we can filter it, but it's better than anything we buy in a bottle. Plastic bottle. And of course, many different groups. I've listed a few of the statewide groups, but there are many local and regional groups and I appreciate the work you're doing with the environment, Lake Alberta, all the things that different folks are doing. We all need to work together for the same common goal, that is protecting the environment and our waterways. And there are many ways that people can get involved in the state. I do this program with libraries, with different types of groups, not just conservation groups. So for some people, they're not aware that the springs in the state are threatened. I'm just surprised at some of the reactions I get from people that they don't realize that these things are going on. And so maybe it's their first exposure to some of these problems, and maybe they can get involved because of that. So at this point, I'll open it up to any questions. You can do a chat, or you can just simply, we can unmute if we want to do that, either way. But I'll check the chat. I see some comments.
And Doug, please remind people that you have a brand new book out with all of these or most of all the pictures he showed tonight. See, Florida's Rivers, a celebration of over 40 of the Sunshine State's dynamic waterways.
Thank you. I have about 140 photos, so I've showed some of them, but not all in this slideshow. And what I mentioned about the Rodman Dam, so I'm glad somebody put the link in there. And so they're taking comments right now. So make sure you have your input on that. And the more people that go in, if we can say that we had 10,000 people sign up to get out and get rid of the dam, it's going to make an impact. So it's going to be important to do that.
Let's see.
Let's see, one question. What is the single biggest change you've observed over the years paddling Florida's rivers? I'd say it's mostly, I noticed the springs, you know, especially the springs on the Swanny River, those areas, they've turned from blue to green for the most part. And so it's fairly sad, and you see the algae on the rocks. You don't see the native grasses as much. And so I'd say the spring runs, I've noticed the biggest change. I visited the St. Mary's, but that's on my list to paddle. I really haven't paddled the St. Mary's. So what the beauty of Florida, there's so many waterways that
Oops, I'm sorry. You can unmute yourself now. I'm sorry, I just changed the setting so
Right.
everybody can unmute themselves. Go ahead.
Gotcha. So I haven't done the St. Mary's. I've hiked along a bit, and it's on my list. But the beauty of Florida, as I was mentioning, is that there are more places to explore that you could possibly do in a lifetime. If you added up all the creeks and streams, as well as the rivers. What's the paddle you most want to do in Florida that you haven't yet done? Well, the St. Mary's is pretty up there. And of course, my bucket list locally would be the Upper Osceola that some of you guys have been exploring, along with the local Apalachee Canoe and Kayak Club. So I've been busy exploring the Apalachicola creeks for the last year and a half, but I'm finished with many of those. And so I'd like to, when I have a little more time, explore some of the Upper Osceola. I think that'd be great. But I usually work at least one day a weekend for the river keepers. That's keeping me pretty occupied on the weekends. The best river for old growth cypress trees. Well, you're going to see old growth cypress in many places. Most of them are either twisted, they're hollow, they don't have the wood value, so they were spared by the loggers. I would say when you're on the way to the Slave Canal, there's the Avenue of the Giants, they call it. It's a side stream. There's about 5 or 6 old growth cypress right in a row. It's a little bit clogged up with snags at the moment, but that's a beautiful place. And there's a place called Kissimmee Creek above Sumatra in the Apalachicola floodplain, which I've seen some really big cypress in that creek. And I'd like to go back and explore some more. Pretty large number in that area. The Choctahatchee, there's one area. It was basically, it's kind of like an island about 10 miles above Highway 20. Somebody had told me about that, to check that out. When I paddled around it, it appeared to have a couple dozen old growth cypress trees in this area. So somehow it got spared. And that was very impressive to see. Choctahatchee had some big trees along it. So I was told, reading about the Choctahatchee, that the area was never clear cut completely. It was selectively logged, and it wasn't quite cut to the degree of some of these other rivers. And so maybe that explains some of it. Let's see. Any other questions or comments? Are there any rivers that you want to explore that you haven't been on, that maybe you have a bucket list like I did? What chance that Florida might do the same thing for many of its wild rivers? We tried back in the 70s, we tried to get a state wild and scenic rivers program going. The Wasissa, for example, was on that list, and the local opposition was pretty strong. But basically the political will was not there to really develop a state wild and scenic program. A lot of people wanted to keep in loopholes that allowed all kinds of uses. And so it was basically getting watered down, and it never really got off the ground too much. But maybe there's some will and some motivation to get it going again. It's in the books. We do have a state wild and scenic rivers program, but it hasn't been active since basically the 70s.
Looks like Heather and Peter are fans of the Econfina River.
Yep, absolutely. And my slideshow, obviously I can't cover all the rivers, and I didn't cover the Econfina. I mentioned it, but I didn't cover it in my book. There's all kinds of waterways. There's Steenhatchee River. I mean, there's several more that you can explore, and you can't really cover that in one book. It would be an encyclopedia. So check out this statewide legislation that's on the books at the moment, and maybe we can do a statewide initiative. Maybe it can be beefed up into a program that has some viability. And the federal wild and scenic program hasn't gotten very far in Florida as well. They tried to do it for the Swanny, and the local opposition was too strong. So what happened was the Water Management District quietly bought up most of some of the key areas along the river and didn't have any opposition. So basically protected much of the river shorelines. And it did that, the water management districts did that with several rivers in our state without a designation. So basically they kind of did some of the work already that was in the program. So sometimes when you get the word of a federal program, people, you get a lot of local opposition. Maybe a statewide program would have less opposition, I'm not sure.
Any remaining questions for Doug while we've got him? Looks like another one just came in, Doug.
About Manatee Sanctuaries, long-term resident Wasissa feels that Wasissa should be an ideal sanctuary. So the Wasissa, you would have to airlift manatees or truck them in because they can't make it up the Slave Canal. But if you had injured manatees, it'd be a great place for them if they have deep enough water in places. We certainly could use them for controlling the hydrilla, like they've done in the Wakaiba. They've done a good job controlling hydrilla in the Wakaiba. Would there be enough political will for manatee sanctuaries? And it's hard to know. There will be some efforts to protect the manatees more because of the massive die-offs we've had in the past year, and that's alarmed a lot of people. And so maybe that will help push some change. It takes a lot of factors to really get, these type of things through. It takes a lot of public involvement, it takes media coverage, and it takes some funding, and to get some politicians that are behind it, some champions, let them take some of the glory and they can run with it. And you can sometimes get things done that way. But it really takes a lot of PR, a lot of media. Politicians do follow the newspapers and the television coverage, and if it keeps going, and it just keeps going on for months, and sometimes more than a month, more than a year, sometimes they listen. But people have to be alarmed, not just the environmental groups. They're used to hearing from environmental groups. They have to hear from some of the businesses, some of the groups that are not environmental groups, and trying to get the non-traditional folks that they normally hear from, get them alarmed so they can talk to the politicians. That's what it takes. But the manatees dying off, that affects a lot of businesses, along with the algae problems we've had, the red tides. It's not just people that like to fish. It's people that have motels and people that have guide services and people that have all kinds of businesses and restaurants on the water. Those people are affected as much as anybody else. And to get those people involved is very important. I used to lobby, so I'm speaking to the choir. I lobbied mostly in the 80s and 90s, early 90s. Mostly the 1980s. I was pretty young when I got started. I got started in the late 70s when I was 19, so I was pretty young.
Any other questions for Doug? You guys got him. This man has a wealth of knowledge about our rivers, so ask away.
Oh, and Doug, I also was gonna chime in, Donna reminded me, I know Native Nurseries is selling your book, Midtown Reader as well.
I haven't been in there for a while. They usually carry my books.
Okay.
Tallahassee Nurseries, My Favorite Books, the Hearth and Soul store, the store in Thomasville, Georgia, the bookshelf. So many places around the area sell the book.
Okay, great. Christmas is coming, folks, so.
Yep. It is a
Start
good gift
thinking.
book. And my motivation is to kind of excite the kind of the layperson a little bit, not just speak of the problems, but I do cover some of the issues in the back of the book, but to get them excited, get them exploring the rivers, and then hopefully they'll attune to some of the issues and they can get involved with some of the groups.
Okay, great. And we don't have a supply chain issue here, right?
Right, exactly.
They're not out in
far-
container ships.
Far, although I think when Norma first ordered books from Native Nurseries, they got an old copy of a book called Florida's Rivers, which was kind of an encyclopedia that came out many years ago. So they made a mistake. So she had to, even though
oh
she
dear.
sent the right ISBN number, they made a mistake. So,
But
I'm
they've
not
got
gonna
them
say
now.
publisher. Yeah, they changed the title to Florida's Rivers, and then they put the subtitle, which was different than the earlier edition that somebody else wrote, which was kind of like an encyclopedia giving you all the facts and figures. Mine is a little more poetic, I guess, more photos and so forth.
They're selling great.
Good. It's good to hear. I know people are buying them from me out of my car so I have to carry a box in my car because they want to buy several for gifts. And so I've had to order them twice, and 2 more loads. And they're heavy books to lug around, believe me.
Somebody just posted in the chat that Harry Smith Outdoors in Tallahassee would love to carry your book on rivers.
Great. All right, I'll talk to Harry. I know Harry's been a good supporter of River Track. I've been on several trips with him, and so I'll talk to Harry. He'd be perfect for the book. Yeah. And as far as with Riverkeeper, we have an outing every month. We have our last kayak trip until the hikes start. We have that Saturday, which is full at the moment. But our hikes are starting next month. So like Garden of Eden Trail, Torreya State Park, St. George Island. And we do have an outing with the Florida Native Plant Society on October 30th, a field trip. So it's at the Savannah area, the pitcher plant bogs in that region. So that should be really good. And there's openings for that one. And these outings are free, just donation. If people want to donate, that's fine, but they're free. There's no pressure to donate.
Wonderful. That sounds excellent. Well, any last minute questions? I think it's
Talk to me in the future. I'd love to help lead a kayak trip. If Peter and I want to get together or whatever, we can help. If you guys are interested, we can do a trip that, pick a place that you want to go, and I can certainly help with that.
oh, fantastic.
Doug, Heather is the planner of our field trips, and we were talking about doing an upper Osceola from Cuba Bay down to Highway 19. So you will be on that trip if you are willing.
I would love to. If I'm available, I would definitely go for sure.
Sweet. We'd love to have you.
Great.
I'm going to stop our recording now. Stop recording. And I think we can say goodbye to, nope, no, I don't need to do that. I think Facebook will end when we end this. So, okay, well, we kind of have a technical issue that our host or screen is frozen. So I think everybody can just leave. And I think once she closes out of Zoom, that will end the meeting. So thank you all for coming out, and thank you, Doug. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. That was awesome.
Yeah,
that was a really awesome talk.
I love your photos. They're gorgeous.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Love to see. I'd like to do it in person someday. A program would be great. I like that better. But thank you.
Likewise. All right, well, take care all.
Awesome. Night, everyone.
Tallulah,
Bye,
I think
everybody.
go ahead and, did she close out? Eventually it will all close out. Oh, she did. So, oh, I'm a host now. Okay, now I can end the meeting. All right.